Hello and welcome back to another Horus Heresy painting tutorial. In this video I'll be showing you how you can paint your Space Marines in the colours of the Iron Warriors Legion, and as always I'll be using Games Workshop's range of paints to do so. So here we have the miniature, and as you can see it's already silver because I've primed it using the Army Painter's Gunmetal Spray Primer. Now if you don't have access to that, you could also use a normal primer and then spray over it with Games Workshop's Lead Belcher spray. Alternatively you could use the brush paint of Lead Belcher as well. Now once you've got it to the stage, you can the first thing we want to do is to apply a little bit of grime into the recesses, and for this we'll be using Agrax Earthshade. Now for this step, one of the things we want to do is to focus the wash into the recesses. I want it to pour quite strongly there. So this will represent built up oil and grime on the armour, which you can just about see is occurring here. With the Agrax Earthshade wash completed, the next step is to apply some highlighting on the edges, and this time we'll be using a dry brushing technique, and for this we'll be using Necron Compound. Now when dry brushing, the trick is to make sure that you remove most of the paint from the brush. As you can see I've done so here, and just drag it across the edges like so, and you can see it's creating a rough highlight along the knee pads there. We'll be doing this across the entirety of the armour, as you can just about see here. Now as the majority of the Iron Warriors armour is metallic, we want to create some differentiation between the different metallic parts. So for example the lens on the helmet there, also the vents on the backpack, and if I just bring in the bolter, the magazine, the barrel, and also the mechanism at the back. We're painting all of these areas with Ironbreaker. Now as we paint these areas with the Ironbreaker, you can see that it's slightly brighter than the rest of the armour that we've painted, which will give us some nice differentiation between the shades of metal. The next step in painting this Iron Warrior is to wash over the entirety of the miniature with Nuln Oil. Now this will have the effect of not only darkening the main armour sections, but also adding some shading into the areas that we painted in the last step as well. When applying this wash we can afford to be quite liberal, as this will go quite the long way in applying the shading, as you can see here, as it's pulling into the recesses, and also darkening the armour colour as well. Now the next step is to highlight all the lighter metal areas, such as the lens on the helmet, the vents on the backpack, and also the magazine and the mechanisms of the bolter, and we'll be highlighting all of these with Runefang Steel. Now when painting these areas I would recommend using a small brush, and you want to pick out the very edges, as I'm doing so here on the vents, just leaving the dark silver visible in the recesses. Now that we've completed painting all of the silver metallic areas, the next step is to paint all of the bronze metallic areas, and for this we'll be using Balthasar Gold and painting areas such as the shoulder pads and also the panel on top of the chest there as well, and any detailing such as these sections on the leg there as well. Now as Balthasar Gold is a base paint, you should have no problem painting over these areas. However, I would recommend being careful not to overspill onto the silver areas that we've already painted, as we don't want to have to be going over them again at a later stage. Now that the base coat has been applied to the bronze areas, the next step is to wash over them using Agrax Earthshade. Now by applying this wash we are improving the definition by, as you can see here, the wash will pool into the recesses and helps create some nice shading across the bronze areas. Once the wash is dried, we'll now be highlighting over those areas with a very fine line of Hashut Copper. For this step I would recommend using quite a fine brush, as you want to get a very thin line on these areas. You can see here, create this nice bright highlight along the edge. Now that we've finished painting all of the metal areas on this particular miniature, the next step is to paint all the black areas. Now this includes the harness on the chest there, the sections between the plates you can just about see around the waist here, and also the pipes on the backpack and the actual inner sections of the shoulder pads, and if I just bring in the bolter as well. Also the main stock of the bolter as well. And I'm painting all of these areas with Abaddon Black. Now the great thing about Abaddon Black is that it's a base paint, which means it should cover quite nicely over these areas, and I've just watered it down slightly just to apply a couple of thinner coats, and this will give me a really nice and even finish. So now that everywhere has been painted black, we can now move on to painting the chevrons, and as you can see here I've painted the knee pad black as well, as this acts as a base. I'm going to be painting some diagonal lines over the top of here using Rakarth Flesh. Now for this step I would recommend using a fine brush, as I'm doing here, and mixing in a small amount of Lamium Medium into the Rakarth Flesh just to improve the flow. I'm just going to be painting some diagonal lines, some thin lines just very, very carefully. As you can see here, I'm just thickening them out slightly. And then I'll be repeating this process across any areas that I want to have these chevrons, including the stock of the bolter as well. So now that the chevrons have been painted, as you can see I've done so on the knee pad here, we can wash over these areas with Cassandora Yellow. Now by washing over these Rakarth Flesh lines with the Cassandora Yellow, you can see here we get this really nice bright yellow. I'm just going to be painting this across all of the chevrons, across anywhere you painted them in the last step. The next step in painting the yellow areas is to apply a very small highlight along the edges using Dawn Yellow. When painting this highlight, you only want to apply a very small line along one of the edges of the yellow line. You can just see here I'm doing it towards the top of the chevrons as well, and this will just create the illusion of light on the chevrons. The next step is to highlight all of the black areas. So this includes the straps on the chest and obviously the pipes on the back, anywhere where there's black, and we'll be highlighting this with Mechanicus Standard Grey. As with the previous step, we'll be focusing this highlight along the raised sections, so just across the chest here, just picking them out very carefully, and this will just enhance the depth by creating the illusion of light bouncing off the edges. Now that the black areas have been highlighted, the next step is to paint any leather areas, such as these pouches on the back there, with Mournfang Brown. As Mournfang Brown is a base paint, you should have no problems covering over the silver areas from the base coat. However, if you do find that it's quite tricky to cover, I would recommend just applying 2 thin coats as opposed to applying 1 thick one, as this won't obscure the detail as much. With the base coat completed, the next step is to wash over the brown areas with Agrax Earthshade. When applying this wash, you want to make sure that the wash pools into all the recesses, such as the pouch lids there, and this will create some nice shading when combined with the next step, which will be a highlight. Now the final step in painting any of the leather areas, such as this pouch, is to highlight the edges with Skrag Brown. Now when highlighting the edges, you want to make sure that you use a thin brush, just so you can get a nice thin line along the edges, and just very gently drag the brush along, like you can see here, and this will just create this lighter line, which will really improve the depth of colour on the miniature. Now one of the final areas to paint on this miniature are the eyes, in this case the lens, and also the kind of the targeting lens that we've got on the side there. And we're base coating all of these with Mephiston Red. When you come to paint the lenses, you want to be exceptionally careful. Use a small brush, as small as you're comfortable with really, just to apply the base layer. Make sure that it covers the entirety of the lens and don't overspill onto the rest of the helmet, and also paint this lens as well. Now at this stage the lenses are a little bit brighter than we want them, so we're going to be adding a bit of shading into the lenses by washing them with Carroburg Crimson. So this wash, by applying it into the lenses, will darken the Mephiston Red, making it ever so slightly darker, but also creating some shading around the recesses and in the around the lens. Just do the same on the target finder as well. Now once we have a base to work from the lenses, the next step is to create a glass effect, and we can do this by adding some in some reflections. And first of all, we'll be starting off with a highlight of Evil Sunz Scarlet. With this highlight, we want to paint a very small line along the base of the lens around the bottom there, so I'm just going to be using my brush very carefully, painting a brighter line just along the bottom there. Now the final step in painting this particular miniature is to apply some light reflections onto the lenses, and for this we'll be using Ceramite White. Now the only thing we need to do for this particular step is to apply a very small dot into the left corner, in this case, into the back corner of the lens, just like so. And this creates like a light spot, and in this case I'm just going to do the top right, just to the right, like so. And here we have the completed miniature, who you can see I've glued the bolter arm to and glued down onto a base. Now whilst I've only tackled a normal standard Space Marine for this tutorial, you could apply the same techniques and colour scheme to any of the Iron Warriors Legion. Now if you enjoyed this tutorial, be sure to check out my previous Horus Heresy tutorials, and also subscribe to be kept up to date with any future videos that I do. Additionally, if you enjoy these tutorials and would like to support me, you can do so by heading over to my Patreon page, where you can donate from as little as $1 a month, and that'll just help to support me in making future videos. So until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.